Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Let's talk about your psychology, what's really going on with it, how to manage it. Now more important than ever, the world is apparently falling apart. At least that's what a lot of people want you to believe. For pretty obvious reasons, right? I mean, it's fear. Fear about the external world. It is a great feeling, right? No, it's a not bad feeling. It is better than looking at facts about your life, looking at issues going on with you. Even if civilization is collapsing, it's not like these things go away. We put these things on the back burner until civilization stops collapsing. We're always dealing with them. We actually see, really, I mean, if you want to get weird about this, let's get weird. We see our psychology reflected in civilization. Not every time, not at every temporal interval, it's exactly that, but overall, that's what's going on. And what you see going on in America, generally speaking, is what's going on in the American psyche, generally speaking. Like, there's no way around this. It's not, oh, yeah, I'm going to manage my issues once I get these other things handled. It's like, no, you manage your issues so you can get those other things handled in the most healthy way possible. And really, looking at those other things, that's really a distraction from the work that you really need to do. So I am not going to talk too much about what's going on right now. It's not that complicated. I think it's very simple. So why do I need to keep talking about it if it doesn't have anything to do with your psychology? If you have questions about it, maybe I'll answer them. I'll see if I get around to it. I don't know. I get so many questions around here. Yeah. But other than that, I don't really feel like talking about it. Rather talk about you, which in a way, of course, is talking about that. But yeah, your issues, how do we manage them? And what does that look like? Sooner or later, you're going to get it. There's something called the click. It's really powerful feeling. And I don't know if you guys have done any physical activity. I've definitely noticed this in stretching. Any technical skill, you notice this. You notice this in weight training too. I noticed this when I was reading Milton, trying to get into reading poetry. And if you don't read poetry in a long time, it just doesn't matter. You don't get it, right? I mean, same thing with Shakespeare. At the beginning of reading Othello in ninth grade, it's like, what's going on? But at the end of reading Othello, you think, oh, okay, I get this. It's like this click that happens where everything that you're looking at before, like all the poetry on the page you're looking at before, it just looks different after a while. And something clicks and you start to get it. And I think that's how it is, working with your psychology, working with issues in your life. You're feels like you're pushing against, you're struggling against this anxiety, and then things click. It's like, wait, I just feel different. I guess I'm technically the same person, but something going on in my psychology. Like, I'm doing different things. I'm acting in different ways. In a strange sort of way, your mannerisms are always going to be the same, like your father's, right? Which is always annoying. But it's like something in your psychology changes. And, that's really what we're going for. Still going to have the same struggles, but it's going to look different. And the highs and the lows are going to be different, right? The highs are going to be higher. The lows are going to be higher. So often when we start managing our emotional issues, like let's say we want to stop going on YouTube so much. Oh, I found myself, I regret today. I found myself back on YouTube. I wasn't really doing the work that I wanted to do. Like, that's fine. That's fine. There's going to be highs and lows. But what I was talking about, just the lows get, earlier this week in my video, the lows get higher. Was I talking about that in my video? What was I talking about? I was talking about that with somebody. The lows get higher, right? So, yeah, you manage these issues, and okay, so now you're on YouTube maybe 30 minutes less a month. I don't know. That's better. And it just keeps getting better. Now, you don't work through that by focusing on not going on YouTube. Right? You just don't go right to the symptom. You go to the cause. You work on that cause. You work on the anxiety, the distraction, the procrastination, the getting lost in your internet hole. It's just going to get better. And things just start to click. I think it's really important to, your psychology matters, especially now. And, so many of my psychological ideas that I have are, I kind of feel like a sham in some respect. I mean, it's not that I really lift these ideas from Jung, but they're just so heavily inspired by Jung. So I guess if in the religion of Animus, a lot of Jung's work would be the original text. Some of it more fundamental than others. Some of it, do we even include the apocryphal? I don't know. But I think it's important to understand what Jung is talking about, because it's exactly what we're dealing with in the world today. And it's exactly what we're always dealing with at every time, as I brought up in the beginning. It's all about you, and if any problems with society, then it comes back to you. Always. So let's go over volume 16 of Jung's collected works. I don't know if this is going to work, but I've talked about Jung's works previously. I think another podcast, I tried doing like a PowerPoint, like a slide presentation, which I really don't like doing slide presentations. I just have this aversion to PowerPoint. I'll do it if I have to, but I'd prefer not to. Plus, making PowerPoint slides is kind of annoying. So I think in this episode, we're going to go about it in a little bit different way. I just wrote down just several points about volume 16, the practice of psychotherapy. Oh yeah, so this is piggybacking on my video from 2 weeks ago about how to listen. I mean, a lot of what we're going through right now is because we just can't talk to each other. We can't listen. We don't give somebody the benefit of the doubt. Why would we not do that, right? Because of our own resentment, perhaps about our father. It doesn't necessarily need to be about him, but a lot of it does go back to that. And if you look at a lot of political movements, I don't want to get too into what's going on right now, but it could go back to father issues, right? It could go back to my father wasn't there to love and support me and hug me. So what I need to do is I need to get myself validated in other ways. Or I need to tear down other people to make myself feel bigger than I am because lack of validation just led to this intense dysregulation going on earlier in life. And it made it very difficult for me to do certain things and to function normally as an adult. So screw it. Let's just tear down all of civilization. Now, some of it does go back to that. Not always. I'm not going to psychoanalyze a whole organization, a whole perhaps Marxist organization. But this comes down to listening to talking. Yeah, so why wouldn't we give somebody the benefit of the doubt? Why wouldn't you do that? I mean, everybody's so nice and so people-pleasing in the rest of their lives. I mean, that's probably part of the problem. We live in an epidemic. Not a coronavirus epidemic, but a people-pleasing epidemic of, who am I to have needs? Why does that even matter? Right? We do that so much, yet when we're talking with somebody about politics, geez, we're not that nice. Well, it could be the case. I mean, couldn't it be the case? If we look at this, I know it seems paradoxical. Jung would argue that a lot of psychological truths are paradoxical. We may get into it. It's not really paradoxical. It's just, given the context, things are a little bit different. So how could somebody be really nice and always put people first, yet at the same time be really mean online? They're doing the same thing in both of those situations, right? What are you doing when you're being nice, or being nice in quotations, putting other people first, being a people pleaser? Oh, I'm fine, right? I mean, that's the refrain. Dog with the coffee cup. Coffee cup makes that meme. I think I always bring that up when I talk about that meme. The I'm fine dog, his apartment burning down with the coffee cup. Yeah, you're just tuned out of yourself. You're so practicing being tuned into other people. It's like your needs, your emotions don't matter, and that's what you're doing. You're in a sense trying to validate yourself through the validation of other people, through the at least projected validation of other people, and that's what you're doing when you're online, not giving somebody the benefit of the doubt. It's just another way to get a fiat form of validation. I mean, it's not really the validation that you need. I mean, we will ruin our lives. We will ruin our lives trying to get validation from somebody that we can only rightfully do ourselves. Like your dad abused you, you want him to apologize. You want him to say sorry and give you financial compensation. None of that's ever going to matter. No, if anything, that'll just make it worse. Have you not read Infinite Jest, right? The apology from the parent, that narcissistic Oedipal issue. of I need to get my validation. I need to feel okay only through the mother or the father acting as a mother. No, that comes from within. How do you validate yourself from within? Well, you have to go somewhere where everybody thinks it's verboten to go. You have to talk about anger and how that may actually be extremely useful. Now, when most people get angry, right, they're not really getting angry. They're getting hostile. We don't see healthy forms of anger too often. Aside from movies, James Bond has a great integration of his anger. Anyway, got off track. So let's just go through some points. And I have a laid out in paragraph form, so I'll just go through the paragraphs. If you want to read along or follow along, I have a couple pages of notes here. Let's just go through them. I mean, the first thing that Jung talks about, I'm not going to go through so this book is comprised of half speeches and then half alchemical analysis of transference. I mean, transference is an unconscious process, the projection of the patient's unconscious onto the therapist. And come out a bunch of different ways of, just aggravated to exaggerated emotional states. Like, oh, you're the father, you're here to save me. Oh, you're my father, I hate you, right? But it's just the patient projecting that out. And that's an unconscious process. Alchemy is an unconscious process. So in the second half of the book, Jung analyzes transference through going through 10 alchemical steps. I don't know if we need to go through that. Plus, I mean, this book's long enough. It's only like 350 pages. I mean, compared to other books, it's not that long, or other of his collected works. Anyway, okay, I'm taking too much time. So right away in paragraph 5, Jung just makes a great point. He's critical of collectivist straw man of individualism. What does a collectivist say about an individualist? It's like, oh, well, you're part of society. Are you not part of society? We all have an influence on each other. And what Jung is essentially saying, I mean, paragraph 5 of this book on psychotherapy is, yeah, of course we're all part of society, but society is just a bunch of individuals. You have to first and foremost focus on the individuals. And then if you only focus on the individual in the context of society, sociology, I'm looking at you. Gee, why do we have a 9 billion% replication error or pattern or rate, whatever? Well, why does that happen? Well, you're not really looking at the fundamental mechanism of society, the fundamental unit. And he says that's individualism. So this is, paragraph 5 here. I forget the title of this speech. And all the speeches, I think, are from the late 20s, I think maybe earliest 1930 through, I think, maybe 1942. He made at several conventions, psychotherapy, psychoanalytical conventions, and a few of them are published. One of them is an essay originally published in English. Jung did write in English. I think, yes, his last book, not Symbols of Change, whatever his last book was that he just wrote for popular consumption. And it's with Man and His Symbols, and it's with several other contributors. That I think he originally wrote that in English. So yeah, he's just very critical of this collectivist straw man. And then he says that there's 2 types of neurosis. I think this is a great point. The person who's either, then he goes on and commits the same kind of straw man against individualism a little bit. It could be argued. But there's 2 types of neurosis. There's the collectivist and then there's the individualist. There's 2 collectivists and the two individualists. We know what he means by collectivism for sure. Just the mass man, too wrapped up in society. You can't think for yourself. You can't feel for yourself. More importantly, on a psychological level, if you can't feel for yourself, you're definitely not going to be able to think for yourself. You will just be rationalizing, making excuses. It doesn't end. And then there's the guy who's, quote, too individualistic, isolated in a sense. This comes back to your boundary, right? Are there too many holes in your boundary, or do you just put up walls and not think about it? Do you not let anybody know when you're angry, or do you just hold grudges? You just hold on to the anger. And I guess could be overlap there, because by holding on to a grudge, resentment, not letting go of the anger, you are in a sense not telling anybody about it. It's just different ways of managing it. Great observation, paragraph 10. Jung just intuited what we all came to know eventually, and only recently. And everybody just kind of knew it was BS, but the idea that the therapist's personality matters. Like some rapport between the therapist and the patient is ultimately what matters. And Jung says in paragraph 10, no, it doesn't. Like it may, but it's more about connecting, more about getting the person to understand, which doesn't have anything to do with rapport or your personality or whether you have, it's just, are you helpful? Do you show the patient what's going on? Do you help them elucidate it? I guess in some respect, I don't think anyone talks about this. In some respect, you have to be trustworthy, but I think confidentiality kind of takes care of that. Like this is a safe environment. This is a safe space. Do even people talk about safe spaces anymore? I mean, I feel like that's like very 2015. Anyway, then paragraph 11, he was just criticizing the CBT, the cognitive approach of the day, and something like, yeah, if you really don't want to understand your problems or what's going on, maybe you can go to the proto version of a cognitive behavioral therapist, somebody who focuses on cognition, a very rational approach, not that irrational necessarily means irrational, corny Jung. Too many tangents already. Yeah, but if you don't want to really learn what's going on, then maybe just go to somebody and get suggestions. But at that point, you really don't have a psychological issue. There wasn't a psychological issue. If you can go into the therapist and he can show you, hey, you have a difficult time procrastinating. How about you make a schedule this way and then you use it and it solves the problem? That wasn't a psychological issue. That was just an error in knowledge, and that does exist. But most issues that people have, I mean, you wouldn't be so interested in psychology to listen to this boring podcast that's obviously putting you to sleep right now. You wouldn't be so interested in doing something so silly if it was just a matter of, how do I make a schedule? Thanks, Tim Ferriss. It's not really what people need. And Tim Ferriss isn't trying to be a therapist, but there's a lot of bros on Twitter, guru, self-help mindset training bros. The schizoid fantasy, that is mindset training. Oh, I don't have to interact with the world. I'm just going to change my thoughts and change my feelings and things will just go better. Yeah, that's probably not how it's going to work, dude. He talks about dreams. If an unknown woman shows up in various forms throughout a series of dreams, and especially that is the anima representation in a man. He goes on to talk about animus representation, but let's just deal with the anima representation. I mean, yeah, so how that woman shows up, especially what you have to tune into when this happens, because, I mean, I don't think I've ever met a guy who doesn't have a recurring anima dream. What does she look like? Yes. Also, what kind of feeling do you get from her in the dream? Like, what does she do to you emotionally in the dream? Right? That's what you need to do to yourself. That's not saying, I need a woman like that to make that happen in my life emotionally. Yeah, that will help. And when it comes, I mean, I really don't think that a man can fully integrate his anima at all. But I don't think he can do it a lot better job of it with he has the a girl in his life, or the proper girl in his life. And then he gives good credit to Freud here in paragraph 29. Boy, how long is this going to take? Well, if I don't get to all of it today, if I don't get to all of half the book today, maybe I'll talk about it, or let me know if this is helpful for you. And then in paragraph 29, it's like, look, the symptom, you can't just look at the symptom. You can't try to change the symptom the way that, he uses the analogy of a doctor dressing a wound. Like, you have to get the body to heal. Now, the physical body does that itself, but we need to go through certain processes in psychotherapy to do that psychologically. Yeah, in paragraph 61, I mean, this is just a really helpful way to think of archetypes. People have this view that archetypes are this woo-woo idea that, Jung had this crazy dream and this meeting of some, like, powerful personality, this woman who showed up in his life, in his dream, and then he had all these crazy visions about the psyche, and that's where he got archetypes from. That's not where he got archetypes from. Jung was first and foremost an empiricist, and he views archetypes as, what does he say here? Yeah, just as a way to differentiate reality. Way to, in a sense, categorize reality. Not philosophically, like Kant was saying, but psychologically. And a good way to think about it is, if prairie dogs If prairie dogs were smart enough to write myths, what would their myths be about? They'd be about the different roles in society, in their prairie dog society, based on the roles of the prairie dog, based on what the prairie dog is. Because of what the prairie dog is, there's going to be one hero about going out and hunting and getting a really big bird or whatever prairie dogs eat, and then there's going to be another one, a hero about, somebody that guards the villager, the prairie dog civilization. That's all it is. So if you're a prairie dog archetype, will look at the world psychologically, again, not philosophically, doesn't disabuse your relationship with reality as Kant thought, but Freud took that Kantian observation and took it from the philosophical level to the psychological level. And he says, actually, we're more in touch with reality. We can differentiate reality better because of the archetypes. Another point that I just obviously lifted from Jung is this is about libido integration with reality. How well can your psychic energy, which isn't always sexual, sometimes is, according to Jung, not Freud. Freud would disagree. He would say it's always sexual. How well does your libido integrate with reality? And archetypes are a way for us to differentiate that, to in a sense, provide better outlets, provide a stronger stream, not to make it a sexual analogy, to provide a stronger ejaculation of our libido into reality. Okay, but that's the point of the archetype. It's like people have this crazy, Jung and his woo-woo ideas. Well, look at what man is. Look at who we are. No, not who we are. First, look at what we are. He makes that distinction in this book, too. It's just the first half of this freaking book. And by the way, volume 16, part of the reason why I'm going through this practice of psychotherapy is because, I just want to talk about listening and communicating with people and how to really get through to people versus getting through to yourself. This is just a book that nobody talks about, but it's just filled with great information. Yeah, some of it's rehash of what he said in other books. Fair. Yeah, so I think that's a really important point about archetypes that we just don't understand. How does this relate now? We live philosophically in this Kantian view that says, you have your reality, I have my reality. The people on the left and the right, maybe there's some genetic difference between them. I understand there may be personality is genetic and so personality can dictate our political views to some degree. Obviously, it's not just that. People use the univariate fallacy. We talked about that a couple weeks ago to say that, it just comes down to personality type, and people who are artists are more likely to be, Democrat or liberal, however we use that term now, progressive. It's like, we just have different realities and there's no communicate. Well, no. You just misinterpreted really what Kant was talking about and what Jung is clarifying here. This is just a way to differentiate reality based on who we are. It's not about having my truth. You do have your subjective truth, and that does matter in the context of therapy, but in the context of a philosophical discussion, it doesn't matter. And when it does matter, we get the two people from different sides not really talking to each other. Whenever somebody says my truth in the context of a political debate or cultural debate, like, no, my truth is arguably more important than objective truth, but not in the context of a political debate. And we have two sides now not understanding that. The one side says, my truth is more important, in a way they're right, and the other side says, your truth, that has no meaning, and in a way they're wrong. They're right and they're wrong. Just about context. But until we understand the distinction between Kant and Freud, between philosophy and psychology, couldn't change how we relate with each other. And now we don't look at Kant's categories and use that as an excuse to completely disconnect. Really what that is disconnecting the libido psychologically from reality. Exactly what Jung didn't want. But he knew that just throwing out Kant was just a philosophically unsophisticated solution. It was easy to disabuse. Nietzsche already kind of did that. But it's like, wait, there's something going on here. Let's integrate these different ideas so we can actually connect with reality better. Because, philosophically, reality is there. Psychologically, it's not. You don't really know. My dresser there, is it really there? I don't know. right? The closet, the chair, like everything. Are these things really here? Maybe, but not necessarily psychologically. We need to create a relationship with it. We got to tune into it, right? Like the internet router, it's the same thing. It's there, but are you connected? I don't know. You got to work on yourself, right? You got to get yourself in line. You got to connect with your unconscious to do that. Past could influence present attitude. Oh yeah, so Jung talks about the regressive tendency. This is paragraph 64. The regressive tendency, the tendency to pull the libido away from the external world, is what I talk about with the secondary emotional payoff. And Jung says something. I don't think the secondary emotional payoff is necessarily something to be avoided. The payoff, the emotional cocktail that you give yourself, that you have trained to give yourself, compensate for not being able to communicate well to adults in childhood, which is probably helpful for childhood, but maybe not so helpful when you're an adult. I mean, if you're doing something silly, like if you have a neurosis and you're committing it over and over again, there's some reason. I mean, it's not working out, right? Because you're not connected with reality. There's some reason why you're doing it, and the reason is you got to pay off emotionally. Helplessness, like that's a big one. Self-pity. Oh, woe is me, poor me. And you say, well, I don't feel good when I'm in self-pity. It's like, well, you kind of do, because now you have an excuse for just doing nothing, right? Yeah, so that's the regressive tendency. Oh, I think we'll get through most of this. Yeah, so if in the regressive tendency, Jung's talking about in the payoff, if the longing is, let's say, for example, and I think he uses this as an example, or maybe this is mine, a longing for the father. You're like, oh, I wish my dad would have hugged me more, or oh man, if only my dad was more supportive, then I would have gotten that job, or that girl wouldn't have rejected me. Like if you find yourself having that, stay with that. Understand what's going on there. I think Jung brings this up at another point. The symptom is, and I think I already brought this up. The symptom is there's tons of information in the symptom, in the neurosis. Why are you trying to get rid of the symptom? Why are you trying to do the CBT top-down thing? No, don't do that. It's like, oh, this book is too confusing, or this is too hard, or I'm bored, looking at, let's just not read it. Like, no, there's tons of information there. And so if you find yourself longing for your father, well, great. That just means what? You really want a connection with your father. That's your call to do that now. Now you can't go back and make anything up. Not like that would help anyway, right? Infinite jest. Nobody's going to apologize to you enough to overcome your daddy issues. It's about you generating the father within. How well do you manage your anxiety? It's you generating the mother within. How well do you manage your anger? How well do you, in a sense, nurture yourself, create a sense of compassion? That's what this is about. Yeah, in paragraph 94, it just talks about unconscious metaphysics, something that we talked about when I went over Jung's answer to Job in Psychology and Religion, right? Those 100 pages. And it's like, look, you got to understand when Jung's talking about, psychic truths, how they're just as important as physical truths. That's, again, the distinction between what Kant was talking about and what Jung's talking about. Philosophy and psychology. It's like your truth, like that is not objective reality, not even close. In the context of a political discussion, it does not belong there. But in order for you to be more in contact with objective reality, you got to tune yourself first, like the computer to the wireless router, right? You got to get in the same frequency, and you do that by managing your emotional issues in the way we talk about here. And I don't have a paragraph for this, but there is a good it's somewhere between 94 and 87. I'm going backwards here. I don't know. Well, it's the difference between association and amplification, where Freud utilized association. I mean, Jung did too. I mean, that was his original foray into the psychological world, his word association experiment. But Jung does something else, and it's essentially the I guess you would call it the abstract or conceptual version of association. So the word association is, oh, what do you think when you think of your father? And you say evil, right? That may say something about your relationship with your father, but Jung wouldn't stop there. He would say, okay, that's important, but that doesn't really give us any information. That only gives us a lens, right? That's only a symptom of what's really going on. And so Jung would do amplification, which is looking at the association in a wider context, looking back at, that's why myth is such a big deal, but looking at the foundational stories of our civilization to whatever extent they are, like the Bible. Oh, you're going through trauma. You have this one view of trauma. Let's amplify that out to, hey, this is what Philoctetes went through. What did Philoctetes do? In addition to that, Philoctetes, he was this guy from 3,000 years ago. So you're relating out this guy who's 3,000 years old. Well, that's insane. I mean, that just gives you so much context to your trauma. Right? I mean, every freaking myth ever is about a son feeling disconnected from his parents, feeling disconnected from his father. Right? This isn't just your issue. This is an issue that you have. One word switch, just the biggest deal in the world, though. This is an issue that you have. Everybody else has. Join the club. I mean, this is amplification. Yeah, the result of amplification is essentially the psychological equivalent of going, yeah, join the freaking club. We're all doing this. How many freaking references can I point to get you to see join the club? I mean, take out all the supposedly superfluous references in Jung's books. I mean, all 18 or 19 of them would be 100 pages, right? But it's important. He's painting a picture. If there's a feeling of being stuck, this is from paragraph 87. So if there's a feeling of being stuck, and by the way, the association versus amplification is one of the reasons why when the implicit association test came out, whatever it was, 15, I first got wind of it probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, before it was totally debunked. I was like, oh, well, of course this isn't, what is this measuring? And all it's measuring is association. It's not measuring amplification. It's not measuring what's really behind your association of a black face with not a Jimmy Fallon blackface. I guess he's in trouble for that. But between a blackface and like some word like bad. Right? Well, why do you have that association? Is it because you're racist? I mean, you might be. But there's like a million other interpretations. That's why I'm like, well, this isn't measuring. I mean, this is exactly Jung's point about Freud. And now everybody, yeah, I'm the idiot because I go back and read Jung, even though I can clearly see, I can save you years of your life by reading paragraph freaking 87, or paragraph between 94 and 87 anyway. And so feelings of being stuck, so that's the most typical problem that he saw, just the presenting problem in therapy is, oh, I feel stuck. And then he talks about, it's not, feelings of being stuck could be because of loss of libido. I mean, not that you lose libido, but if you retract it from the world for such a long time, you just break. That's depression in a sense. But it also could be from interacting with the world in a one-sided way. And I think he doesn't talk about his types here. I don't know exactly when this speech was given, this lecture was given. It was after 1921, though, which is when psychological types were written. But this is an indication of what he's talking about with the psychological types. Like if you were INTJ, you're not really an INTJ. That's just how you've adapted yourself. Introverted thinking, right? Introverted thinking about abstract ideas. So how do you get yourself unstuck? Well, extroverted feeling about concretes. Maybe you have to get better at expressing feelings in a simple level if you're an INT. So it's just a good point there. Good point, me. Yeah, like neurosis, fantasy may be not necessarily be about what it's about. I mean, there's tons of useful information in a fantasy. So, dreams, I think, are symbolic representations. I mean, we take experiences from our conscious life and use them in dreams, but I think those symbols, even if they're about something concrete in your conscious life, can mean something symbolically and bigger than what it is. So if you have a fantasy, treat it like in the same way. So if you have a fantasy about being a rock star, that doesn't mean you want to be a rock star. That means you want the psychological compensatory element that comes from being a rock star. So, if you're a rock star, you don't have to talk to girls. Are you afraid of talking to girls? Yeah, you probably are. Most guys are. I know I am. Okay, well, maybe you want to be a rock star just to compensate for the fact that you don't want to talk to Susie in math class. That's something to think about. I'm not saying to never be a rock star. I'm not saying that. I mean, obviously, the need to impress women is part of all a man's actions to some degree. It's even part of me doing this podcast. Probably. I mean, as sad as that sounds, this is my way of impressing women. I mean, in a way, yeah, I just remember being in high school and, reading Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass, like, I'm going to be smart. And that's like most like smart guys' fantasy, right? Like, I'm going to be really smart. And girls will like me for the fact that I'm smart. And in a way, that is true. And that is what happens eventually. But you got to be other things too. And obviously you reading freaking Lewis Carroll isn't, that's Lewis Carroll, right? I get him and some other British guy mixed up. C.S. Lewis. I get those two mixed up. It's Lewis Carroll. All right. So there's a lot of value in the fantasy. So again, like the regression of the libido, like the secondary emotional payoff. It's fine to have it. Just look at what's going on and look what you're really telling yourself by having that fantasy. Yeah, and then in paragraph 102, around here, he talks about the importance of painting your dreams. Not that it really like makes fun of some of his patients, like, well, they're not really great artists, but it's still helpful to paint your dreams regardless, because, and it doesn't even help you understand the dream more, but essentially what you're doing by painting your dreams is you're just, paying homage to the religion of the self. And then that's what I could, describe Jung as in a way. It is the religion of the self. How do you create a spiritual experience with yourself? You're going to do it in some way. Maybe through organized religion, through dogma isn't the best way. And although Jung talks about how the dogma is really just a vehicle for the religious experience, for that function, for activating that function, maybe that's not the best way. And maybe politics isn't the best way. He saw what was going on in Germany at the time and Russia. Yeah, I mean, Jung was one of those guys not fooled by communism at all. He wasn't like, oh, no, look at these reports. Oh, everything's going on. He's like, this is tyranny. It's Nazism, just on a different scale. Okay, so this is probably the most important part that I should get to at some point. Jung talks about 4 stages of analysis: confession, elucidation, education, and transformation. Now, I would probably put education a little bit first. I mean, this is what we're doing here. This is one stage of therapy, just letting you know what's going on. And then Jung talks about, the importance of confession working with elucidation. You can't have one without the other. Elucidation is essentially explaining, so if you kept a secret, Jung's big thing is you can't have any secrets. You can have a secret shared. He still calls that a secret, but it's a secret shared versus a secret that you keep hidden, that you don't tell anybody. And he essentially goes into this long tirade about how it actually inhibits proper libido function in the environment. In a sense, it inhibits proper connection with the environment. And if you can't connect with the environment, you can't make decisions, everything's out of whack, and you're going to start doing weird stuff, like with it, thinking that you need an apology from your father, as opposed to integrating the inner father by managing your anxiety. But in a sense, you need both, because confession is a way to meet the unconscious, and elucidation is a way to make sense of the unconscious. And you're much more likely to confess to meet the unconscious if you can elucidate it, if you know what's going on, if you know the point of, but why would I be telling you these deep, dark secrets? Well, this is what your unconscious is. This is how it works. And actually, you're inhibiting your relationship with reality by keeping stuff in. by not talking about it. And it's not just concrete secrets, it's emotions. He talks about abreaction, which, one part of abreaction is, secrets, but also experiencing affects that you would feel uncomfortable experience outside. So you get good with them in proper therapy. And I think that a lot of the abreaction comes with talking about the secret or talking about uncomfortable things. I mean, you can't talk about something uncomfortable in your life, like perhaps a dicey relationship with your father and things that he may have done, resentments you may have, without feeling that anger, feeling that sadness. And, in the context of therapy, that's really important. And that, essentially what Jung is saying is what I say is you're acclimating yourself. You're acclimating yourself to various emotional states. So when you're out talking with somebody about politics, you're much less likely to be triggered, for instance. And then he talks about the secret being like, it's strange. Like, so this is paragraph 125. Is the secret like? He knows that it's just a psychic reality, right? Of metaphysics of the unconscious. But he also treats it like it's a physical reality, because I think that's just a helpful way. I mean, just like treating myths and heroes like physically real, it just helps us integrate our psychology to project it out. And the more real the projection is for a time, the more likely we are to really work with those unconscious issues. And so he talks about the secret being this thing that, and I think it's a great visual for what happens. The secret just closes off in your mind and like splits off and like goes back into the rear of your mind, so to speak, and becomes a complex. It becomes this thing that you feel are sensitive about and you're trying to avoid. It could be an uncomfortable issue, a relationship, a feeling, why we have abreaction. And so you are, in a sense now, like your mind's not connected. When your mind's not connected, you're not going to be relating with reality. Because in some respect, you're relating with reality, but at the same time, you're trying to avoid that complex. So it's like, what are you really doing when you're moving across the country, for something? Are you doing it because you're relating with reality? You really want to go there, or are you running from something? It's a complex represented by the city where you're coming from. Then he talks about, sometimes just talking about an uncomfortable issue is enough for some patients, just the confession part. And it's just like so strange to me. I mean, this is a big part of the therapy I do. It's just so strange to me that you would expect to make any headway in therapy without having some sort of confession, of some sort of laying out what's going on. Not just for the therapist, but for the patient, for the client, right? Right? What do I always say? We go years of our life without talking to anybody. And it's not like a bunch of us have like deep, dark secrets, but we keep some things hidden from this one group. We hide this other part from this other group, to just go somewhere and lay it out with somebody and see his face, see what the therapist's face does. It just gives you a completely new, and you would never, you could never project out what that would feel like. You never think like, I could really get rid of my procrastination just by talking to somebody about what's going on. At the very least, we can even elucidate it. Right? We can even educate you on the process, and we can even then that leads to the transformation. All right, I think we're almost done here. Well, I guess we're running a little bit long. Yeah, unconscious, our relationship with it, it's more about context than anything else. Paragraph 328, Jung has a more positive view of the unconscious, and Jung accuses Freud of the mind-body dichotomy, essentially saying, like, look, if you just think that the unconscious is this thing to manage and deal with, not integrate properly into your psyche, into yourself, your capital S self, so relate with reality better, then, you're just committing the mind-body dichotomy like everybody else did up until this point in civilization. And then there's just some disagreement here between Freud and Adler. One's about sex, right? Freud is about sex. Adler is about power. One's more extroverted. I don't think he uses that term in this book, because even though this was written after 21, when Psychological Types was written, Adler is more about power. And, Freud talks about just the different ways of, like, no one way is correct. Our issues are about sex and power. They're about both. Now you have to use a different approach on somebody has more of a sexual issue, somebody has more of a power issue. I define that as authority and intimacy, which relates back to the Oedipus complex. So it's really, you just took two sides of the Oedipus complex, how well you relate with men and women and what those represent. And then this will be my last point. What was this? So for 338, I have good Bolshevist experiment. Let me look this up. I'm looking up stuff. Yeah, I remember it being at the top of this page. The recognition of the unconscious is not a Bolshevist experiment, which puts the lowest on top and thus reestablishes the very situation it intended to correct. Basically making fun of the Russian Revolution. And when was this? When was the speech given? Let me look. Just to give you an idea of how prescient Jung really is. This is 1931. People in America in 1931 are, maybe the socialists have a point. Are they putting man on the moon right now? Or, did they really launch Sputnik? Or that was maybe 20 years later. So the recognition of the unconscious is not a Bolshevik experiment. Basically, we're not taking what we view as the peasantry, the lower class, the unseemly of our psyche, the unconscious. We don't take that and give it supremacy to our conscious mind, because that sacrifices consciousness as a whole. We must see it that the values of conscious personality remain intact, for unconscious compensation is only effective when it cooperates with an integral consciousness. Assimilation is never a question of this or that, but always this and that. It's not about rich versus poor. It's not about white versus black. It's not about any of these. It's about how do we work together. Manage your psychology, I think. Society be better. You're not doing it for that. You're doing it for you. And a nice consequence of that is society will go in a healthier direction. I'll leave it there, guys. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Let me know if this was helpful or if this was, super boring and you want me to go back to the PowerPoint. Either way, we're talking about boring Jung collected works. It's just how do you want me to serve it to you? I'll leave that up to you. Let me know what you think. Animus at animusempire.com. We do free consultations. animusempire.com/schedule free 30-minute consultations. Just let me know what's going on with you. I can let you know how I work. You can let me know what's going on with you. If at the very least, I'll just point you in a new direction. Did another consultation this week, and it was just like, you don't need my help. How about you start with this book? Then if you still have this one issue after reading this book, come back and maybe we can talk and do something. All right, I'll leave it there, guys. Thank you again, and pleasure doing this. I wish you all the joy and pain that comes from being in touch with reality.